Records and journals from relatives long past. He moved toward it, pulling out books one by one, his hands trembling with urgency. Anna stayed close behind him, her gaze flicking to the dark corners of the room. There was something moving just beyond the candle's light, something, waiting. The hairs on the back of her neck prickled, and she felt an overwhelming sense of dread settling in her stomach. She wanted to ask Ethan if he felt it too, but she couldn't bring herself to speak. Every breath felt like it might draw the curse closer. The door to the cabin suddenly slammed shut with a deafening bang, causing them both to jump in startled terror. The noise echoed through the house, and for a moment, it felt as if the entire cabin had come alive. They both froze, listening to the sounds outside the room. The wind howled louder, the trees outside bending under its force, but something else lingered, a low, guttural growl that rumbled through the cabin, making their blood run cold. Ethan's eyes locked onto Anna's, wide with fear. He felt the presence before he saw it, the way the air seemed to thicken, pressing in on them, suffocating them. The thing was getting closer. "We need to hurry," Ethan said, his voice strained as he pulled another book from the shelf. It was an old leather-bound volume, its cover cracked with age. As he flipped it open, a gust of cold air swept through the room, extinguishing the candle in an instant. The room was plunged into darkness. Anna gasped and clutched at Ethan's arm, panic flooding her chest. "What's happening? What's going on?" Ethan couldn't see her, but he could feel her trembling against him. "It's here," he whispered, barely able to get the words out. He knew that whatever force had been stalking them had made its presence known. Suddenly, the cabin door burst open with a violent crash, as though something, or someone, was forcing its way in. The wind outside roared like a beast, but it was the sound that followed that sent them both into a panic. Heavy footsteps, slow and deliberate, echoed through the cabin. Footsteps that didn't belong to a living person. Ethan felt his stomach drop as the air seemed to grow colder still. He could feel the presence pressing in, wrapping itself around him like a suffocating fog. He grabbed Anna's arm, yanking her toward the farthest corner of the room. "Get down," he hissed. They huddled together, trying to stay hidden, but the darkness was thick and impenetrable. The footsteps drew closer, heavy and unnervingly slow, and the sound of breathing, raspy, gurgling breaths, filled the air. Anna could feel the warmth of Ethan's body next to hers, but it was overshadowed by the icy chill creeping into the room. Then came the whisper. It wasn't a voice, they both knew that. It was something worse. A slithering sound, like words dragged through a mouth full of decay. It came from the far corner of the room. "I can smell your fear." The words reverberated through the cabin, wrapping around their minds like an iron vice. The thing knew they were there. It knew they were hiding. Anna's heart pounded in her chest, her breathing shallow and erratic. The terror was overwhelming, suffocating. She couldn't take it anymore. She had to do something. "We need to find the journal," she said, her voice shaking. "Ethan, now." Ethan nodded, but his eyes were darting around in the darkness, trying to focus on something, anything, that would lead them to the journal. The footsteps were growing louder, closer. He had to act fast. In the murky shadows, he spotted the faint outline of the bookshelf, still visible through the dim light from the open door. His heart skipped a beat as he saw the journal, sitting innocently on the top shelf. "I found it," he whispered urgently, grabbing the journal and tearing it open, his hands shaking as he flipped through the pages. The book was filled with ancient symbols, rituals, and curses, but as he read, one thing stood out. The curse could be undone, but only if the spirits were appeased before the first strike of dawn. His heart dropped as he glanced at the window. The sky was beginning to lighten. The first rays of dawn were fast approaching. "We have to hurry," Ethan shouted, grabbing Anna's hand. They couldn't waste any more time. The creature was drawing nearer, its heavy steps unmistakable now. Ethan didn't know how much longer they had, but the journal's instructions were clear: they needed to perform a ritual to break the curse and send the spirits back to their resting place. And they had to do it before the first light of morning. He couldn't fail. Not when Anna's life was on the line. The creature roared in the distance, its growl shaking the walls of the cabin, as if it were warning them that they had no time left. This section escalates the hauntings, ramping up the tension and fear as Ethan and Anna realize they have to act quickly to break the curse. The presence of the creature becomes undeniable, and the urgency to find the journal and perform the ritual becomes their only hope for survival. Let me know if you want me to continue. The oppressive darkness seemed to close in on them, as if the very walls of the cabin were bearing down on their souls. The creature was near, its breath rattling in their ears, its presence an overwhelming force. Ethan gripped the journal in his hands, its fragile pages now their only hope of survival. His heart raced, but there was no time for fear. They had to act. Anna clutched her brother's arm, her body trembling with terror. The wind outside howled louder, rattling the windows and making the cabin seem as though it might collapse at any moment. The creature was coming, and it would not stop until they were consumed. "We have to perform the ritual," Ethan said through clenched teeth, his voice low and desperate. The journal's words swirled in his mind, but his hands shook with the weight of the task. The ritual was their only chance, and they had no time to waste. The first rays of dawn were peeking over the horizon, casting a faint glow through the cracks in the wooden walls. The clock was ticking. If they didn't complete the ritual before the sun fully rose, the curse would become permanent, and they would be trapped here forever. Ethan and Anna moved swiftly, gathering what they needed. The ritual was complicated, requiring specific symbols and items that were scattered throughout the cabin. Ethan's mind raced as he worked, his hands moving automatically as he set up the makeshift altar. Each movement was measured, each gesture urgent, as if the very air around them was thick with impending doom. As Ethan placed the final candle on the floor, a bone-chilling screech erupted from the shadows behind them. It sounded like nails on a chalkboard, only far worse, like a tortured soul crying out for release. The hairs on the back of Ethan's neck stood on end, and he turned toward the sound, his heart pounding in his chest. In the corner of the room, the shadows seemed to writhe, twisting and bending unnaturally. The air grew colder still, and a deep, guttural growl emanated from the darkness. Ethan's eyes widened in terror. He could see it now, its shape barely discernible, but the outline of something massive, something grotesque, looming in the dim light. Anna gasped, clutching at her brother's arm. "Ethan, it's here." The creature stepped forward, its form materializing out of the shadows. Its skin was gray and rotting, its eyes black and empty, its mouth twisted into a grotesque snarl. It was the thing of nightmares, a manifestation of every fear, every torment they had ever known. The air around it rippled with malice, the very atmosphere bending under its power. Ethan's pulse raced, but he forced himself to focus. The ritual wasn't just a matter of reciting the words, it required their energy, their intent. They had to channel everything they had left into it if they were to stand any chance. "Anna," Ethan said, his voice steady despite the terror clawing at him. "We can't stop now. We have to finish this." Anna nodded, though she looked terrified. "I trust you." The creature let out a roar, the sound deafening as it lunged forward, its monstrous claws reaching for them. Ethan and Anna stepped back, but they didn't falter. They had come too far to give up now. With shaking hands, Ethan opened the journal once more, reciting the ancient incantations that would bind the spirits and break the curse. His voice trembled, but he pressed on, the words tumbling from his lips in an unbroken rhythm. The candles flickered wildly, their flames dancing in the breeze that seemed to have no source. As the final words of the incantation left his mouth, a blinding light filled the cabin, so intense that it seemed to burn away everything in its path. Ethan shielded his eyes, but even through the haze of light, he could hear the creature's desperate screeches. The force of the ritual pushed against him, tugging at his very soul, but he held firm. Anna cried out, her voice lost in the howling wind that had suddenly filled the cabin. The floor beneath them shook violently, and Ethan stumbled, nearly falling as the ground trembled with the power of the curse breaking. The walls seemed to crack, as if the very foundation of the cabin was being torn apart. Then, in an instant, the light vanished. Silence. The wind had stopped. The air was still. The oppressive, suffocating darkness had lifted. Ethan and Anna stood there, panting, their hearts still racing in their chests. Slowly, Ethan lowered his arms, and Anna stepped forward, her gaze flicking nervously around the room. The creature was gone. The cabin, though battered and worn, seemed to have returned to normal, the oppressive air now replaced by an eerie calm. For a moment, neither of them could speak. They simply stood there, trying to process what had just happened. Anna finally broke the silence. "Did we do it?" Ethan didn't answer immediately. He closed the journal, his eyes scanning the room once more. There was no sign of the creature. No growls. No shadows. It was gone. "I think we did," he said quietly, his voice hoarse. "I think we're safe." The siblings stood in the cabin, the first light of dawn creeping through the cracks in the wood, signaling the end of the nightmare. The curse had been broken. But as they looked out over the snow-covered landscape, a sense of unease lingered, like a shadow they couldn't shake. The terror was over for now, but deep down, they both knew that evil like that never truly disappears, it just waits. The aftermath of the ritual was almost too much for Ethan to fully comprehend. The weight of what they had just survived pressed down on him like a suffocating blanket. The world outside was peaceful now, serene, even. The storm had finally passed, and the sun's light bathed the snow-covered mountains in a soft, golden glow. But it didn't bring the comfort he had hoped for. The terror of what had happened still clung to him, lingering like the scent of decay. "We need to leave," Ethan said, his voice barely a whisper. He hadn't intended to speak out loud, but the words tumbled from his lips before he could stop them. He glanced at Anna, who was staring out the window, her face pale and drawn. She nodded slowly, the same unease swirling in her eyes. "I don't think I can stay here any longer." The memory of the creature, the way it had emerged from the shadows, its voice slithering through their minds, would never leave them. Even though the curse had been broken, Ethan knew that it had left a permanent scar on both of them. As they gathered their things, the realization hit him hard. They had been so close to losing everything. They had come so close to being consumed by the very thing they had been trying to escape. And yet, they had fought back. They had survived. Ethan's eyes flicked back to the journal resting on the table, the words still fresh in his mind. The creature was gone, but the knowledge of what had happened, of what could happen again, remained. The curse may have been lifted, but there was always the possibility of it returning, of something darker following them, waiting for the right moment to strike. "I'll make sure you're safe," Ethan promised, more to himself than to Anna. Anna turned to him, her face softening as she walked over and placed a hand on his arm. "I know." They left the cabin, stepping out into the bright morning sun, but the road ahead was uncertain. The mountains stood tall around them, silent and unmoving, as though they were watching over them, waiting for the next chapter to unfold. But for now, they had survived. And that was enough. As the siblings made their way back down the mountain, the weight of what had happened seemed to lift slowly from their shoulders. The world outside was no longer shrouded in darkness and fear. The sun now bathed the landscape in warmth, its rays breaking through the clouded skies like a promise of safety. Ethan and Anna walked side by side, their footsteps crunching in the freshly fallen snow. They hadn't spoken much since leaving the cabin, both of them still processing the events that had unfolded. But there was a quiet understanding between them, one that spoke volumes without needing words. They had faced an unimaginable evil, and they had come out the other side stronger. As they reached the edge of the forest and the road that would take them back to civilization, Ethan glanced at Anna, his heart swelling with gratitude. He had saved her. He had kept his promise. And that was all that mattered now. Anna looked up at him, offering him a small, tired smile. "Thank you, Ethan. For everything." Ethan smiled back, his heart full. The nightmare was over. But the journey ahead would be long, because the terror they had faced would never truly be forgotten. Yet, as they walked into the light of the new day, they both knew one thing for certain. They had made it through. Together. Thank you for listening to Isolated in the Snow, a brother's desperate plea to save his sister's life. We hope you enjoyed this thrilling tale of survival. If you did, please don't forget to like and subscribe for more gripping stories. And be sure to check out the videos appearing on the screen right now for more suspense-filled adventures. Stay safe, and we'll see you next time.